Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's Physical High Press webinar. The staff involved are Paul Lever, who will host. I am a senior FA youth coach developer. I've done this role now for 10 years. Moving across the screen, Ian Foster, who is the men's national under-18 coach. Then we have John Griffiths, who's women's national coach and YDP phase lead. We also have on here Stuart Delaney, who is an FA YCD in the Northwest. We have Matt Portas, physical performance and education lead from the FA. And our analysis for this evening is Matt Ramsbottom, who is deputy head of analysis in the Football Association. The areas of discussion within the title of the webinar will basically come down to what the high press looks like in your environment, preparation of players to play in this way. So Matt will obviously have a large opinion in this way. And then some practice design ideas that Stuart Delaney will lead on. I want to start initially just showing you what the high press is, and also linking into all the work will link back to the principles of play, which you can see in front of you. Obviously on the right-hand side are the out of possession principles of play. So we're just going to play you some footage. And then hopefully we've had some technical issues with Ian Foster, but hopefully in that time, he'll be back on to take some questions with the rest of the people on the webinar. Over to you, Matt. Okay, great. I've just been looking at the chat box on the right-hand side that's been playing. One or two have had issues. If you do have any issues with visual or auditory, just put a message in the chat box and hopefully Matt will be able to help you in that area. Again, if there's anything you do miss due to technical issues, you will be able to find this recording on YouTube, the FA Learning channel from tomorrow. And then finally, the success of the webinar will come down to hopefully the interactive nature of your questionings, that we can answer the key questions that you want to pose to us around the content. So initially, Fozzie, are you back on the webinar, or have you still got technological
problems? I'm here, mate, yeah, I'm here.
Fantastic. So obviously looking at as I watch the footage there, and as a coach developer / coach, I'm always looking around, well, what's the philosophy of our play? And then what strategy may I use in my games and within my training. And I'm linking back to the 6 wise men, as in who's doing it, when are they doing it, where are they doing it, what are they doing, how are they doing it, and why are they doing it? Link back to how I help players to improve. What's your take on how you work your national under-18 team? Link back to the principles play, and what strategy do you use?
Well, should we put the footage on? I can talk through it. Is that easy for me to do that?
That's fine, yeah. Go on then, Matt.
So just to give you a bit of context, so this would be a match day -3, and the players would have done some principle-based pressing training before this. The tactical stuff with regards to particularly high press, I like to do on a full-size pitch with 2 11s in. So the players would have done something earlier, and they've set up. The Reds have set up how our next opponent was Brazil. So they would have set up like that, and it might look a bit strange at times how the Reds risk passes, how deep the centre backs are. But I've got some match footage which shows you that in our planning we had got it right in terms of what Brazil might try and do in terms of building the attack. So the idea is we press with 9 and a wide player. Not in this instance, but we're trying to get them inside the pitch. So we try and show inside. So if I just hold it there, the key is that these players, so the 9 and the wide player, will start outside the centre backs to press them inside and show them through the centre of the pitch. So once it goes centrally, it's jumping on central passes. On transition, can you get a shot? Can you get a finish? So if I just hold it there, so the reason I press in this particular way with 9, 7, and we put a 10 in midfield, it's in a 4-2-3-1 shape. I find that once you show them inside the pitch, if you win it back on transition, you're in shape. So rather than showing them outside, where you lock them into one side of the pitch, on transition, then it can be a bit untidy, and you might have to circulate the ball around to get yourself back in shape. It's a little bit more dangerous this way, but I think the benefits on transition much outweigh showing outside. So like I say, active pressure in the centre of the pitch, jump on central passes, be aggressive. And if you stick the match footage up for me, Matt, I'll just show you what Brazil did and how we tried to defend against it. So one of the things we spoke about with Brazil was quick restarts. So on transition from goal kicks or anything like that, get into shape early, because the keeper will put his hands on it and play. So if I just stop it there. So we're pressing with the centre forward and the wide and the right wide player. The centre forward is key to the positioning of the rest of the team, and I'll come on to that. But the starting position is outside the centre backs because we want to get them inside the pitch. Once it goes, the 7's trying to show them inside, and then the fullback here jumps on their fullback, and we come around. Fortunately, the goalkeeper gives it us, but we're in shape on transition to go and attack, and a better cross might put us in business. So if I just hold it there, so you can see the centre forward, so our 9 is here, that's the 11, the 7 is here, and the 10 marks the pivot player in midfield. So the 9 dictates where the overload is. So if he starts on this side of the pitch, that means that our right back has a 2v1 against. Okay, you're always going to give something up in the high press, but you can determine where the ball goes in terms of your overload. So because we've got a particularly physically strong right fullback, we start with a 9 on this side of the pitch because he's really comfortable jumping. So it's a 3v3 in here, and we zonally mark so the 10 doesn't end up in the 4 position. And here's the 2v1 here. So if he jumps, the centre-back gets himself round, and we mark 1v1. So again, the 10's in shape on transition to get a shot off. So this is the next game that came along. This is South Korea, and in our planning, we noticed that South Korea, if you went right down on top of them, they'd go over your press. So we spoke about just giving them enough rope to hang themselves. So we had a deeper pressing line. So the deeper pressing line, you're almost embarrassing the opposition to play first line, and then once they do, it's your reaction to go and press. The keeper doesn't particularly want to do it, but once he does, one thing that does cause you and can cause you a problem in a 4-2-3-1 when you're pressing is when they play with a double pivot. So an advanced AT just drops in as a double pivot. So it's a communication whether the central midfield player jumps and is aggressive, or whether the wide player goes, and it's that kind of communication. In this instance, the central midfield player takes responsibility, recognising it, presses aggressively, fullback's really high and aggressive, centre-back comes round and is an aggressive, and we come out with the ball. So that's how we high press with our team, with the under-18s, and we've done it now for a couple of years with this age group. I'm sure there's 1,000,001 questions why you do it, how you do it, and for what reason. So fire away.
Brilliant. So great start, Fozzie. Just a couple of things off the chat box, and it's great that we've already got some questions coming in from chat box. Some are around CPD hours, which Matt will sort out. So one of the questions was, when you're pressing with your 7 high, pushing in with your 9, where do you want your 11? Just where would your 11 be positioned?
So the 11 does the right back. So the imbalance is with our right back at the 2v1. So the 9 is on the corner of the box, which means the 11 is deeper on his side.
Right,
so he would mark the right back, and the left back looks after their 7.
Yep, that's fine. That was a question. And did at any times Brazil go long, and what happened?
They scored. That's how they scored against us. So the game finished 1 each, and they scored. They went third line. They won first contact. They picked up the second ball, played a straight ball through and scored. So in a game where you're expecting Brazil to play through the thirds, playing between the lines, loads of rotations, which they did, they scored by going direct.
Great. Now, I'm going to link John in now. First question, John. Any differences linked to male and female game? And then second, if you'd like to take the question from Daniel Sutcliffe, and he would be talking about, would you press all the time, or were there times when you might drop off? So a double-pronged question there. Okay?
In terms of differences, there will probably be some developmental differences, particularly in the YD phase that we play in. So, for example, in some of the nations that are ranked lower in UEFA or FIFA, is that you may find that the goalkeepers can't generate as much force. So what that means is that you can move your back lines up higher, units up higher, and you can get more regains. If, for example, goalkeepers are distributing out from the back and they struggle with that technical range. So other than that, all sort of distances, things like that become relative across opposition. What you'll find is more developed countries like Germany, Spain, USA, for example, will operate with far more physicality and been able to generate sustained possession, sustained attacks, sustained pressure. So, it depends on the nation that we're playing against as to whether we would use it as a strategy. And I'm probably linking into that around the question. For us, it depends on the nature of the tournament or the experience you're trying to get for the player. So, for example, if it's a double header, we can afford to compromise some of the result type stuff to focus on what we want from the learning bit, physically, technically, tactically. If we're playing in a tournament over, our World Cup was the potential of including warm-up games, 7 games in 35 days. So, we've got to pick our moments based on there is a physical cost to the press. We've got to pick our moments in which we may use it against certain opposition. So, for example, our second game was against Nigeria in 37 degrees of heat on a rubber 3G at a 1 o'clock kickoff. So for us, pressing in that sort of heat, second game in against the nation that are used to playing in that sort of heat and intensity, it is nonsense for us. So what we did is we afforded them the opportunity to get the ball into play and then sort of pressed inside a mid trap.
Great, thank you very much for that. So a couple of questions again, and I can answer the first one. Matt Fisher, would you always show inside? Well, that's just a strategy that Foz is using with this team at this specific time, and it's actually a strategy in the DNA as well. But potentially in development, working back down the food chain, just working with you've got to decide how you want to play, link back to the players, and I'm going to invite Matt in a second. But potentially, I can show inside or out as long as I justify why I'm doing what I'm doing. I can press linked to with the younger players. It might just be around the 3Bs, a bad touch, a bad pass, or a back pass, 3Bs. That may be a trigger for me to press, and then I'll go through the strategy of how I'm going to press, of which Fozzie's given you an example, and John's give you a couple of differences that may happen.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yeah, of course you can, Foz.
I just that comes down to your game planning. So if you think that the opposition have fullbacks that can't play out of tight areas, then you might show them the outside. Okay. If you're playing against, so recently the Italian teams in our age groups play 4-diamond-2. So we wouldn't show a diamond inside in a high press. So we'd show them the sides where we'd have an overload. So it all comes down to your planning. So we wouldn't necessarily always show inside. That's our preference. But it comes down to your planning.
Brilliant. So again, he's justified exactly why he does why he did or why he does what he does. Why would you show the ball outside if they're really strong in wide areas with wingers, etc.? So you just literally got to work out what you're playing against in that higher PDP phase. If you're in development, FP, YDP, you would experiment with different ways of playing, so that the players have the ability to play in any strategy selected for the opposition as they get older. Joel Silizar asked a questions around what are the considerations for high press. So again, obviously one of the big considerations, if I want to really press high and have a high tempo game, will be around the physical conditions of the players. So if you want to just come in here, Matt, and just give us a brief introduction of some of the work we're going to look at this evening around the physical conditioning and the support of the players.
Yeah, thanks, Levo. I think it's not just the physical conditioning, but the profile of the players in the first place. You know, a high pressing strategy we saw from all three videos that we looked at so far. You know, your forward players, if you're going to high press, are going to need to have that capability of accelerating powerfully, because they've got to close the distances to put pressure on the ball quickly. Otherwise, the opposition are just going to get out too easily. But they've also got to have that capability of performing repeated high-intensity efforts, because usually the forward players will be involved in possession, then the ball's turned over, and then they're having to press to win it back almost immediately or within a very short space of time. Or when you do win it back again, on some of the clips we saw, they then are involved in possession at high intensity as well. So high intensity repeated activities out of possession when they're high pressing, and then immediately in possession working at high intensity. And that takes a certain type of fitness. It means that you've got to have plenty of anaerobic energy. You're dipping into and borrowing energy from the energy that's stored in the muscles. And players have got to be conditioned to that to be able to play in that way. And it also helps if they've got the kind of genetic profile that supports that as well. So certainly in your forward players who've got the ability to recover quickly from high intensity activity, and also has a big reserve to be able to draw upon when they need to be able to press. And that kind of links back to the question that you asked John as well around, would you do it all the time? Well, from a physical point of view, to press all the time is very, very difficult, particularly if you're going to do it in a tournament situation where you've got games regularly, like the guys on this webinar kind of are faced with, but also across the season. If you've got a really high tempo, aggressive pressing strategy, it's very, very difficult to maintain that across an entire season. If you're in development, then obviously you need to help the players, expose them to experience this type of activity in matches, but you would also work off the field with the players, particularly developing the strength in their legs to be able to break and change direction. So when those repeated bouts happen, players are obviously accelerating, they're braking. They've got to have strength in the quads and the muscles on the front of the legs and the hips to be able to change direction quickly. So on and off the field, you've got to help players practice that, but also prepare physically for that.
Great. So linking into that, there's some slides later in the presentation where Matt will go through the physical loading when players work, specifically in the type of press that Fozzie's discussed initially. Secondly, Connor Jennings has asked a great question that I want you to ask again in about half an hour, and which will go to Fozzie around midfield rotation. So Connor Jennings, please ask that question again, because it's now gone off the chat box on my screen. Finally, that a lot of the questions that are coming in now, which is why I'm not going to ask them, are linked to some of the presentation later on. So obviously the three key things that we put on the slideshow are proving quite a lot of interest to you with your questioning. So I'm going to invite Stuart in now.
Levo, can I just if the guys read, I mentioned profiling the players there. Is that something your considerations in terms of how you want to play? Obviously, it's a bit different in international football where the players are coming in and quite quickly you've got games. So are you looking for players who've got that profile to be able to do what you need them to do?
Thanks, Matt. That's brilliant. So as you can see, it's very interactive and you're going to get the most out of this webinar. Ask the questions and we'll try and answer as honestly and as quickly as possible. So linking into 3 or 4 of the questions around, well, how do we develop that to make sure that the players are physically, tactically, and the other 2 or 3 corners as well? How are they ready to play in this way? So Stuart, just take us through some examples of how we may help to develop the players physically to play and tactically to play in this way. Over to you.
Yes, just move the slide on one. So yeah, so we've just got a few examples of some practices, really, what you might want to consider using or start to think about using this framework to develop your own practice from. But it goes in 2 ways, really. It's to think about what's tactically desirable, must be technically possible, but also maybe the question mark underneath it around, is it physically achievable? So recognising the benefits and trade-offs between all the practices we kind of consider to try and develop our players and provide them with the right variety and volume of activities to try and build capacity in the physical corner. But it's really understanding what you're getting from each practice. So we're going to demonstrate and show you some examples of some small, some medium and some large size practices which start to think around the high press, around being out of possession and then looking to try and win the ball high up. Also around the counter press as well, where we've had possession, we've turned over the ball, and we've got to think about trying to win the ball back as fast as we can by being connected with our teammates. So we're going to start off with a 1v1. Only thing we're kind of looking for here is it's a 40-second clip. Very simple practice. It's directional. It's got elements of transition, which are really key. And all we kind of think of doing here is thinking around, some technical elements around the speed and angle of approach, but looking at the accelerations. Certainly as the ball's travelling, to try and close the space down and try and get in a position we can dictate to the opposition around forcing his head down to obviously look at the ball and not look at the space available to him. Also, we've got to think about as the ball's about to be received, around reading his body language, around where he might be taking his touch, but also starting to apply the brakes. So just to thinking about the physical corner, it's a great exercise, just thinking about trying to develop accelerations and braking strength. to try and really kind of reinforce a 1v1 excellence, both in defending and obviously in the attack as well. Because if you get the defending right, it challenges the attacking team as well. But making sure that each practice we try and think about developing, we've got an element of the realism. So when they do win the ball back, having the opportunity to then go and try and finish the attack with a goal or some kind of pass to complete the end product. So we can just go back to the slide, please, Matt. I don't know if you've got any questions around that, Paul.
But my only question there, I would imagine one or two of the coaches are thinking, there seem to me to be quite a few players stood on the outside. So if we're looking at repetition, realism, and realistic to the game, what would be your answer to be as to why we had 2 players playing and 12 players watching, and what type of day would that look like?
Yeah, so the context was it was on a UEFA A course, and the players have actually been playing 2 hours before these practices have been kind of given to them. So we were trying to manage workload, but trying to get some real rich data, which Matt will share with you after these slides around the physical output, around what it is we wanted to try and develop them within. So in 7, 9, 11, we were a constant kind of figure within all the practices we're going to demonstrate. And obviously we'll come to some of the data after these slides, but the rest of the players were kind of moved around the practice to try and really kind of manage their loading. So obviously considerations around that to make sure they could obviously look to see and think about some of the information we're trying to get them to explore. So, when you think about maybe working in your environment with your players, you might be thinking about, limiting the loading to make sure you get some real high quality, high speed runs, but making sure you can really kind of enrich that experience by giving some high detail.
That's a really important point from a physical point of view there, Stu, because what you're trying to do, like you said, is get high quality explosive action. So the focus there is really on the distance that we give the players there. They didn't really have a choice. So in terms of realism, the decision making around do I press, do I not is taken away. When the ball's played in, they've got to aggressively press. That was the practice. Now to be able to maintain, you've got to allow the player time to refill their anaerobic system a little bit before they explode again. Because if you don't do that, if you're just doing one-on-one all the time, then the player will just run out of gas. They'll run out of the energy that supplies the explosive system, and then you'll just end up with slow, low quality. People will stop pressing. The timing of it'll be slower. So in that practice there, we had 1v1s, and then you had kind of 8 players in the practice and two playing at one time. So the other ones are recovering. Now, the time that we gave them, they won't probably fully recover. So if we keep doing repetitions and sets of that, they'll also accumulate lactic acid, which is a byproduct of working hard and working the anaerobic system. But if we keep doing that in training, a trade-off of that is that the players kind of can work anaerobically with lactic acid in the system for longer. So if we put that back into the game situation, it means that our players they're practicing and learning how to accelerate and brake aggressively, but we're also building up their capacity to press for longer if we need them to do that in some of the more intensive parts of the game. So here, they're really developing some skills around learning to accelerate. And a great thing that you can do in this practice is work. If you've got a physical coach who works alongside you, they can perhaps also be giving some of the players some cues around driving the ground behind them away so that they're accelerating more quickly, or sitting down when they're going trying to decelerate. Because if you get those skills right, it means that you'll accelerate harder, but you can also brake later before you arrive at the ball, and that gives the player even less time on the ball to make a decision.
Yeah. And I think
just one thing, Sean, there's a lot of information there. We as coaches have to make sure that we can educate ourselves well enough to hold a conversation in the MDT meeting and have some understanding of areas, sizes, returns of practice, amount of time. And that is massive as coaches. and we have to make sure we liaise well with the physical department. Okay, sorry to butt in, Stu.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a great point as well, Paul. And I think it's been, from the very outset around designing practice, it's about being really clear about what it is you want to try and achieve. So, the practice only comes to life when you've got individuals and you're trying to really kind of improving. So the point Matt made around having a physical performance coach alongside you to try and give some real specific detail around being able to control his body or her body around the balance, the feet, the knees, the shoulders, the head, etc. is really key. So understanding that maybe you'll get high repetition, but maybe reduced realism, but, recognizing that there is a place for this to try and make sure that we've got to really refine the technical capabilities of players 1v1 before we start layering the complexity and moving towards the bigger areas. So, Matt, I don't know if you maybe show the next practice, which is called the Union Jack. So next video, it's called the Union Jack game. So it's now a small to medium area. So we're now increasing the space available. We're increasing the numbers. We're starting to make more informed decisions around how to press. The idea of this game is you've got 3 initially versus 1 pressing, but then you've got 3 extra players around the grid. So as you start to see the video maybe getting played, you start to see it come to life. There's no reduction on the passes being able to play. They can play anytime they like to a different colour player, but then his teammates have to self-organise and come and provide support. This then initiates the press off the next player, so they can start to read cues and triggers around how to go and press. So if they go and press really quickly, they might get into a position where the team in possession haven't organised, so they might go and press really aggressively with a lot more speed. And then they can start trying to develop relationships where they can start to maybe force the team in possession to an area of the pitch where the next presser can get a bit of advantage to maybe get in the front foot and try and win the ball back. So again, it's just layering on the from the 1v1. You've got 9 players within the practice now, but you're getting, you're working 1 and you're resting 2 to try and manage the workload to try and get more quality, high speed runs. But again, still looking at direction, still looking at being opposed, and still looking at that transitional element that if they do win the ball back, they're then being encouraged to try and break out and score a goal or complete a pass.
Yeah, and again, tight areas, relatively small player numbers, so 3v3 there. So a bit like the first practice, if this was in a performance model, then you'd be putting this on your kind of match day -4. You want it's essential stuff. If you've got players who you want to press, you've got to condition them to and maintain their conditioning to be able to accelerate and break repeatedly at high intensity. So, but what you've also got to allow time for, if you're in a situation where your life and job depends on winning games on a weekend, then you've got to allow your time for your players' bodies to recover from sessions like that, because they can really they can cause a little bit of muscle damage because of the repetitive braking and accelerating. So you've got to give the body time to recover from that. So kind of match day -4 is the time when you would do that sort of work.
Matt, just linking into that, there's some, again, Lewis Thompson, I'm glad, it's good to see that you're concentrating by giving the answer to Richard Jones. Well done about the 3 Bs. Steve Carling, good evening. This is one for Fozzie later in the session. He's asked about linking your press to open play. So we'll bring that up, Fozzie, at the end of the session. Do you always press from a stationary position? Obviously you don't, but you'll then link it to open play. A lot of questions about what type of the work looks on different days. Matt has alluded to game day -4. We will have a look at that with John and Fozzie later in the webinar. We're just going to progress this for another 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll move on to slightly different subject. So over to you, Stu, again.
Yeah, so it's going to the medium area practice now. So it's starting to think about how you can start to apply some constraints to the practice to try and get them to think about what you want them to do. So we'll run the actual video footage through first. And then we'll go back to the slide to go talk through why we're doing what we're doing and the benefits of. And then we'll run it again because it's just to have a look at the footage in its in the first instance might not allow you to see exactly what's going on. So directional, it's very game-like. The Reds are the defending team. So if you notice, it's a goalkeeper, a back four, and 2 midfield players, a 4 and 8. Now, the 4 and 8 are actually locked into a zone, which we'll explain later on. We'll go through the graphics. The Red team are a 4 and 8, and then a 10, who's playing as a 10. So it's 4-2-3-1, 7, 11, and a 9.
Do you want to pause it there, Stu? Now, bang. Can we pause it? Just have a little look. You need to recognise this when you're setting your sessions up. What is it? How does that transfer to the real game? Okay.
So we're thinking now about being connected as a Red team, really. So thinking about not letting them come through us. It goes round us. Anything long buys us time so we can react and kind of get ready for the next kind of what if scenario. But we always think about within this practice trying to make it as game-like as we can to try and get different starting points, really. So we don't always want to start from the goalkeeper. We want to start from within play. So we give the team who's certainly defending the motivation to try and play real and play live. But when we go back to the visual, I'll just explain the constraints what we've added onto the practice. So you'll see the players thinking about what it is they want to try and do, and it will become clear shortly. So yeah, nothing's gone really through. It's going into wide areas, and we're trying to pose a challenge. So on the graphic now, if you have a look, so the yellow area is the position where the 4 and 8 from both teams are locked in. So that's really important to begin with. So the red dotted line is the offside line. So what we want to try and do, we want to try and encourage, certainly in open play, the red team to come up to try and allow space in behind for the whites to go and attack in different ways. What we want to also want to encourage is if the whites, to try and increase their motivation, if the whites can win the ball back at any time within 5 passes, they will get the next attack. So all the time we're encouraging them high intensity runs to try and win the ball back as quick as they can, with the reward that they're going to get the ball back next time. The aim of the game this time, though, is if the Reds are going to try and progress and try and play through to the goalkeeper at the other side, they have to play into the yellow area and the ball has to come back into their half. So this does 2 things. It certainly allows the whites to get a bit more connected, but what you're trying to get the Reds to do is break lines with a pass, which allows pressure from the 4 and 8 to get tight, but it also allows the attacking player to turn quickly and to try and apply pressure from the front to try and really kind of squeeze the pressure and double mark. So that's the kind of idea around the constraint being added to the practice around them being locked in. As you start to progress through the practice, then you may allow the 4-8 from both teams actually to go and drop into that half of the pitch, and it just changes the dynamics of the game. So 5 passes. If they win it back, they get it back. You might play transitional anyway because you've got lots of balls to try and keep the whites really motivated to try and give them plenty of opportunities to attack. Then also what you might then want to consider if you want to try and encourage them to try and get even more high intensity runs is that if they can win the ball back, the whites this is, in the opposition's third and score, they get more points. So Matt, I don't know if you can run that video through again for please. Again, you might see it a bit more clearly now where you start to see where the 4 and 8 are locked in. They're being compact, so compact to press. Longer passes they're fine with because it allows you to get across. They don't mind everything in front of them. When it does go into central area, they try and squeeze it back. Again, this is probably about 3 hours into an A license session with candidates, so you'll have to excuse sometimes the mobility. They tried ever so hard. But again, a little bit of kind of motivation, a ball being fed in from the side to try and get a transition. One, to try and motivate the Reds, but also, obviously, it affects the Blues on how they want to try and defend. But the Blues, 4 and 8 locked in, and then you can start thinking when the ball's in the top third of the pitch, the 4 and 8 maybe have to do a man and a half job. So they might have to be considering about marking the midfield playing against, but also thinking about space also. So it's not only what happens at the top end of the pitch around the high press, it's certainly what happens behind it around defending whilst in possession, which will come a lot clearer in the next clip when we start going to the larger area. But again, you know, I think after this kind of block of work, when we did work, we started to introduce that if you can win the ball back in the opposition's third, you then get more points for the scoring to try and encourage them to get a bit more running. Because I think at this point they were getting towards fatigue. So if you go back to the slide for me, Matt, please.
Just a point while they're doing that, Stu, just a point to make from the physical point of view. What you'll start to see here is now we've got increasing player numbers on the pitch, then we can start to let the game flow a little bit longer as well. So the previous practices were, you know, player in, compete, and then out very quickly and recover for longer than you're actually working for. In this one here now, we're starting to allow it to flow a little bit, because with more players on the pitch, the intensity drops a little bit, but the intensity for the players here is obviously still much greater than 11v11 because there's only 6v6 on the pitch. But you can actually start to use 6v6 to start developing the endurance of the players as well. But like you said, by the time they got to that practice, that was about two and a half hours in. So definitely they were fighting a bit of lactic acid within that practice as well.
Yeah, and I think as soon as you start to open the spaces out, they start to attach a decision to the actual action. So, you know, they were quite compact and really kind of wanting to allow the ball to go around them, not get picked off. So they started really start working in a different corner. So certainly when they started getting fatigued, they're starting to apply a decision-making kind of thought process to when they were going to go and why. I think that was a kind of a good kind of still image right at the very end, Max. That was you alongside me when we were doing the session.
That's
so you
right.
were kind of informing me around what kind of time and what kind of block to work in and when to maybe go in and give the players a bit of a breather, where it gave me a really good opportunity to go and give some detail, didn't it, in them kind of breaks to try and kind of layer the kind of complexity of the tech-tac concept, but allow for that recovery to make sure we get the quality and the kind of physical output. So work alongside the physical performance coach, really, really important. I think the next large practice, you know, we've kind of laid it in stages where now we're going to large, bigger areas, but now we're starting to think about how we can maybe utilize different starting points. So you'll see a bit of footage shortly around starting from throw-ins and transitions, but also from goalkeeper kicks as well. So, you know, just to try and vary the starting position so it becomes real and starts to provide certainly game problems for the team, what you're coaching, but also the team, what you're playing against. So this kind of diagram here has got three kind of shaded areas, yellow, white and green. The constraints applied on this practice, for one, reducing the length of the pitch, which allows the white certainly to get the back line height of the pitch, which is important for maintaining really effective high press to try and keep the spaces between the units really compact. But the yellow areas and the white and the green areas, we're trying to give them kind of more score. So, for example, the whites were encouraged to try and play the ball into the yellow area initially off the throw. And the rules were that the two red players, 9 and 10, couldn't retreat back in. So we wanted to try and allow the ball to go in out of our possession. Now, if we kept it, great, we went to score, we got a goal. But if we did, however, give the ball away and we could win it back in the yellow or green areas and we scored, that was 2 points. But if we could actually win the ball back from being out of possession or on transition in the white area, in the central area, and scored, that was 3 points. So how we place scoring systems on the practice would hopefully shape certainly our behaviour in intensifying some of the high-speed runs to try and win the ball back, and might influence how we position maybe our players to try and be connected to try and win the ball back. But it also might also shape the opposition's behaviours in terms of their risk and reward. So do they try to play out and through, or do they maybe look to empty that zone of the pitch? Because if they empty it maybe in the middle third and we win it back, it's just a goal's a goal. So how you start to maybe think about different constraints you can apply to the practice, and also starting positions will allow different things for the players to start considering and start to think about. But starting to recognise that if we go to real large area practices, we start to get more decision making attached with the actions, and we start to get a different kind of physical focus.
Brilliant. I'm going to cut you because Matt will take the video because I'm conscious there's a lot of great questions coming in. We don't need the video now because they've got the great example from the footage. So if you can cut that, Matt. So for you, Matt, there's loads of quick questions now. So a quick 20-second answer. Brilliant, Stu. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Charles Sven, do you vary the pitch dimension? Do you vary the pitch dimension and type of practice intensity to specifically impact certain body components, e.g. hamstring or calf muscles? Answer?
The answer is, yeah, if you want to condition the hamstring, they usually engage in sprinting. To be able to sprint, you need larger areas to get up to high speed. So they would come in kind of big pitch days, possibly match day -3 in a performance model. And then obviously the quads, for accelerating the quads, the calves, the glutes, on those smaller pitch areas, it would be more match day -4.
Perfect. So again, there'll be a lot of question and answers coming out. If you want to revisit this tomorrow when it's recorded, this webinar, it will be on the FA Learning YouTube site tomorrow. Another question, Charles Sven again. How do you calculate pitch dimensions and player numbers to increase or decrease intensity? Do you have a formula? Because there are some formulas out there. Would you recommend any or not?
I mean, there are simple ones, but then again, you've also then got to adjust that in relation to the players that you're dealing with. So particularly around their technical corner, skill level, game understanding. But a very simple one would be 10 meters vertically for every player that you've got on the pitch. So if it's a 3v3, then you might have 30 meters. And then you would make that into a rectangle, so 30 by 20, for example.
Okay, so that again, excellent. I'm conscious now. I want to link into the national coaches again. So coming into you for straight away, could you give me an example of a game day -3, the type of practices you may use to help develop the players linking into the game, the game prep?
Yeah, I'm glad you said 3 and not 4. I've never had a -4. So just we have a 10-day camp. So we've always got to be mindful that the players are coming to us on the back of just playing for the club. So they'll come to us on either a Sunday night or a Monday. And depending on where your camp is, ordinarily you'll meet on a Sunday night and fly somewhere on Monday, or meet on a Monday and train at St George's Park. So the most you'll get is a match day -3. Different teams throughout the pathway have different ways of doing it. Mine is that on match day -3, we'll do an out of possession day. So that'll be the theme, out of possession. Match day -2 will be in possession. And then match day -1 will be myself going through the 6 zones. So 3 out of possession, 3 in possession. We'll touch on the transitions, but it will be basically the game plan and how we play on match day -1. So going back on match day -3 ordinarily will be out of possession focused. So like Stuart's just said, we'll have some principle based practices to begin with, as much to get them back in the frame of mind of what it looks like pressing for an England team, but also psychologically what it means to press and the intensity of that, and then into some big pitch, large area stuff to give them the tactical information that's required.
Brilliant. So linking into that tactical information, John, I'm coming to you in about 2 minutes. So Steve Carlin initially about 15 minutes ago said you obviously can either stop them starting, which is what your footage was, stop them starting. What are the triggers that you try and work on in open play to go and press? Or is it just a case of turnover possession, bang, we're going? What triggers do you work on?
The difficulty now is that since the rule change, I don't think you can stop a team starting. So, okay. And also we used to set the trap. So you know, when you're going through your opposition analysis, you'd identify ordinarily the right-footed left side centre-back, show it to him, set the trap and jump all over him. Now you can't dictate because they go in the box. You can't dictate where they go. So you've just got to be adaptable. So I've seen a question where, why do you position the 9? Is that because of the weakness of the left side centre back? It's not, because we can't dictate where the keeper goes with the ball initially on the first pass. So the 9 is positioned for us because I know that my right back's particularly athletic. So that's what it looks like from a dead ball situation. In open play, it's the same principles. Stuart alluded to it earlier. You might start with a throw-in. You might start with a transition and get them to counter press. Or ordinarily, I will just get the team in possession, building the attack to circulate the ball unopposed. And then on the whistle, the team will go after them. And if the same principles apply, so we'll press with 9 and a wide player, and we'll try and show them inside the pitch.
One of the questions about 25 minutes ago was if you play with a front 2, would it be very, very similar? So you're playing 4 diamond 2 or 4 box 2, similar principles, and who's your first 2 pressers?
Well, listen, I don't play that way, but I see a lot of teams do it against us. Interestingly, France and Brazil both play 4-3-3, but press 4-4-2. You watch Manchester City at the moment; they're the same. The 4-3-3 in possession, 4-4-2 ours. A lot of teams do it against us because the front 2 stop your 2 pivots from getting on the ball. So they screen those passes, which means our pivot players have to come outside the block to build the attack. But I'm not going to talk about building the attack. That's a whole other dance. But yeah, I mean, you can press with 9 and 10. It just means that ordinarily, if you press with 9 and 10, you are left with an overload in the centre of the pitch against you 2 ordinarily. So that's why I don't like to do it.
So as coaches, we have to make sure that we have an understanding of all the different ways that we may play to help the players. We'll have a philosophy how we want to play, but ultimately it may come down to the types of players that we bring into the system. John, I'm going to come to you next. And obviously, you get a little bit more time, potentially, to work on the physical side of the game. Just take us through some of the things that you put in place in the work that you do with the girls' national teams.
So for us, we're operating off 3-year cycles at the minute. So where we have a physical periodization, we've also got a tactical periodization. So Matt was talking about earlier about, the building blocks of the physical performance to them being able to do sustained work by the time they hit a European under-17s finals or a World Cup at under-17s is really, really important. So there's a planning that happens across a 3-year cycle, but then you're then talking about a year cycle, but then down into sort of what happens month by month, week by week for the on the grass work in camp. So we operate similarly, 3-day match day -3 model in World Cups, match day 2 model in Europe, and we try to follow a similar model all the time in our training camps, for example. One of the key things that we have is we can generate live data, or we can generate retrospective data or plan data based on good conversations with our performance coaches. And we have a parameter and a setting that we're operating on, which is when your practices are operating at above match pace, at match pace, or below match pace. And what we'll do is try and tailor our sessions based on numerous factors. So it could be heat, number of games, what you want from it, the adaptations that Matt's talking about around stretching and stressing the players sometimes. We can afford to do that when we've got a match day -2 model and we're playing a double header against, say, Portugal. We can push the players a little bit harder in training, operate more so at a at game pace, above game pace training sessions. But it's all work to rest ratios. So we'll probably go for a block of 10 minutes, and we'll work to 2 minutes on, 30 seconds off, or a minute off, something like that, so that they're working hard, but then they get a rest ratio in between. And that's at game pace or above game pace. And then we might use below game pace for consolidation of that learning. As we were in Jordan, it's 30 degrees of heat most days. We'll do an at and an above game pace as a planned block, but then we might do a walkthrough to consolidate that learning, or use it as a setting the scene prior to the practice, so that they can actually work better and more qualitative when they're doing it at and above game pace. So it all has to be completely planned out across a annual, triannual, monthly, session by session basis based on what we want to return, what we want them to learn based on the principles and the style of play that we want them to play, and then them having the physical prowess in being able to do it.
Right. So linking into that, Matt, I'm going to come to you in a second. We're going to go just to the returns from different positions linked into the high press. Just to go back to the chat box, Tom Whitehead has asked, would you change the way of pressing if you work with younger players? Well, again, I think we answered that earlier in the session, where it would be, if we work in FP, YDP to develop into this area, the players need to have an understanding, tactically, to be able to press in different ways. But also they need to be physically capable of doing that. So we need to link that depending upon the age. If you're training once or twice, again, you just need to get maximum returns for your time. However you plan that with your staff. A lot of questions around constraints. If I can give you some examples. Simple examples that we can all work with players, not necessarily 17, 18. It could be in grassroots. It could be with nines. It might be as simple as we're playing a game and we're playing in a 9-a-side game. We don't allow the wingers to track back, which allows the fullback to get physically overloaded by making a lot of overlaps. It would link to a crossing practice or defending from crosses. It would then link to a player coming back from injury who would be encouraged to not track back, play inside the pitch. So as soon as the ball is turned over, he will obviously get on the ball because he's free. Fullback has to recover back. It might be as simple as that. So these simple constraints just put onto the game will help physical conditioning and physical loading.
Yeah. Well, Levo, it highlights the importance of allowing kids to compete in small-sided games. If you're working in the FP and early YDP, not just competing in 7v7s and 9v9s and 11v11s. Get them playing competitive games of 3v3, 4v4, 5v5, because you're then overloading different physical demands and developing different physical qualities by playing in those smaller sided games as well.
And then linking into, obviously with Matt, if I'm linking into small sided games, I'll be saying to him, how big an area, what shape of area, how long can I play? And then if I really want to stress the players, because Fozzie has a good story around whether the players are capable of playing 3 games in a week in a tournament, I'd be saying to Matt, we'll have 4 minutes, but if you give me 4 minutes to go, but I want the 5th one, but I don't want to tell the players because I want to stress them. I want to know who's rigorous enough and has got the ability to go again when they think they finished after 4 minutes, because I'm testing psychological outcomes. I'm testing physical outcomes. And at some stage, I need to test the players to see how robust they are. Because one of the things that is thrown at players at this moment in time can be that we're not robust enough as we get through the age groups. So I'm talking now 15 to 18 time. Are your players robust enough? And how do you test them? So, Matt, just to link into the next part of the webinar, we're just going to look at the returns of what the different types of stresses are on players in those front areas of the pitch. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll probably start, Levo, by just saying about there was a question came through about like what's more important, helping to develop anaerobic or aerobic qualities in the players. The answer to that is they're both really important. Football's an intensity sport. If you look at the higher level of the game, it's more intense. The players are quicker. They do more explosive actions. So in that regard, to get players to the top of the game, we really need to get them conditioned to be able to play high levels of the game using anaerobic energy. But where the aerobic system comes in is that if you're aerobically more fit, then you recover from those high intensity bursts of actions more quickly. So the quicker that you can breathe in oxygen and use that to kind of repay the energy that you've borrowed from the muscles, then obviously the earlier you are able to go again at high intensity. So again, they complement each other. You can go for longer if you've got and you can go more explosively if you've got a well-conditioned anaerobic system and muscular system, and you've got the skill of being able to work at speed. But equally, if you've got a good aerobic system as well, then it helps you to recover, and you can maintain game pace more quickly. So I think that's a really important point. But I think looking at these graphs here, it wouldn't be a fitness coach or a sports scientist talking if we didn't have a graph. So I thought I'd throw a couple in there for you. The red bars here are the team that we saw at the end of the part that Stu presented around the practice designs, where we had the 11v11 practice on a 3/4 pitch, and there were some constraints put on the practice to encourage the red team to press. Now, they were coached over 2 half-an-hour periods for different types of pressing. One was a man-to-man strategy, and one was a setting the trap, where they were actually trying to show the opposition outside, so kind of opposite to what Fozzie was doing with his players. But it's just an important figure to show. If you look at the 2 red bars, that's the same team just being coached in 2 different pressing strategies. So actually, the man-to-man strategy for that group of players actually places a higher physical cost on them. They have to cover more meters per minute, so more intense running to be able to complete the man-to-man, and that has implications on how fit your players are. Can they do that all the time for 90 minutes, and can they do it repeatedly if you've got a congested game set up where you've got maybe 3 games in a week or something like that? And also, can they do it throughout the season? Can they sustain that if you're asking them to work at that intensity all the time? So that's where you might have different challenges. Now, it's also important to highlight at this point that you'll have noticed that the players on there weren't England players, they weren't full-time players. These were coaches and some ex-professional players who are coaching now. So that's why the numbers might not match up to where some people who are working in the professional game are used to seeing these distances and the numbers here. But it's just an important point to make that, to press in different ways will sometimes cost more energy, and it will also cost some players more energy than the rest of the team. So the red bars here are the 7, 9, and 11. So we had kind of 3 forward players playing in the pressing team that you saw in the video. Relative to the rest of their teammates, they had to do significantly more work in accelerating, decelerating, and high-speed running. So again, that links back to the profile of your players that you've got in those forward positions. If you want to press, you've got to have players who've got that kind of energy and the capability to recover and re-go again, and the physical strength to be able to brake and accelerate and do lots of that work, because that's what the demand of pressing puts on. But again, the man-to-man press had a greater physical demand in that department for those players than the setting the trap. And just to kind of finish off this little section of graphs, what I want you to focus in on this one is the green rectangle that you can see on the left-hand side. That indicates the one acceleration that the pressing, the wide player, the right-hand side forward player in our 11v11, this was a 2-minute spell of his game. And the rectangle there shows the one kind of high-intensity acceleration that he did. He typically, in that half hour, did 2 hard accelerations every 3 minutes. Now, the next figure is, you'll be pleased with this, Levo, because this is the session that you put on. So this is at Union flag practice. Yes. So this is the same player pressing in the Union flag practice in a 2-minute period. And what we see here is that he has to do 6 hard accelerations in a 2-minute period. So this just shows that practice is getting the player to accelerate hard with a lot more repetition than he would in a typical 2 minutes of an 11v11 practice that he was doing. So in that sense, what that session is helping him do is to is to train his body, to condition his body to tolerate more accelerations, to learn the skill of accelerating, but also put the energy system in place to be able to do more. So that if we keep doing this consistently over time, when we put him back into competitive 11v11 games and we want him to press, he's going to be able to do that harder and more often for us across the course of a game.
Brilliant. I've had a good question from Sean, and I'm going to answer this one if I may. His question was, I agree there are high-intensity players at the top level, but there are also very technically gifted players that are not so able to fit into a high-intensity system of play. And you put there Muller. I'm not sure whether you mean Gert or the guy who's still playing now for Bayern or wherever he's playing. Are we not following an idealism rather than recruiting a varied talent? I think the bottom line is when we recruit players into a system, we recruit them in because they've got some sort of gift or they've got some sort of talent. So whenever I worked in the academy system, we worked off tabs, technique, attitude, balance, and speed. If you had 2 of those, you got a trial. If you had 3, you probably got in. If you had 4, you had a chance right through the age groups. Now, if I've got 2 players who are both scorers, but then one also has an ability to run around and give me something a bit extra, I'm probably going to go with him. So, yes, it is around getting technically gifted players. Of course it is. But we would want a level of hard work and ability to put the defensive principles into play. That gives those players a much greater opportunity of getting a career somewhere. And that's the job of the academy. Develop the person. B, develop the player. And C, try and get them a career. And if at worst they come out and they haven't got a career, they've had a fantastic time. So it's not an idealism. It's just saying, no, we want to recruit talent, but talent won't come through if it doesn't work hard. You've got to work hard. The most talented players in the world, they work hard, as well as having a fantastic talent that they've developed and been nurtured over the years. Anything else to add, anyone on the panel around that?
Yeah, I think
so. I'll jump in on that.
Hey, look at that, they're already. Fozzie, that's you, you're in.
Sorry, Stu. So I think just to add to that and put some context around the England teams, I think in my age group at the moment, we've got a really talented number 10, and he's not blessed with pace or physical attributes. So it kind of suits the way I want to press. So I can hide him in midfield, and he looks after the pivot player. Now, if I don't have that type of number 10, I can still have my pressing strategies, but I have to look at the profile of my players. So if you don't have that 10, you might want to change maybe how Liverpool press. So you look at the profile of Liverpool's players, the advanced 8s jump to press fullbacks. So you might have to look at that. So I'm still pressing high, I'm still pressing with intensity, but the profile of my players suits the press. So going back to the number 10 that we've got in our team at the moment, he still has to press with intensity. He still has to know what the rules are in terms of playing for England. Because if I say to him, look, don't worry about it, we'll just go into a mid-block because we don't think you can run round, he can't play for Gareth. So we've got to still high press, but find a way of accommodating him in that shape and in that system and within our pressing strategies.
Yeah, just on that, Ian. So the challenge we have is that unlike a top club, we can't go and buy players. Yeah. You know, we have the players available to us, male and female, that the system produces. So, you know, we have a plethora of ways in which we can accommodate players within a pressing strategy. And, you know, coaches are bright enough to work around those sort of things. So if a player like the 10 that Foz is talking about there has a standout attribute, we want to utilize that and find other ways of working the team kind of around it. So we're in a situation where we have what we have. And if players have standout talents or attributes, we have to work with those. Whilst not ever the expense that, you know, there is always a given that players have to work hard to be talented in any setting. But for you know, the hard that we're talking about in terms of the physical outputs, loads, etc., players are different. They're all different, and we only have available to us what the system produces at any one moment in time.
stats are that the games.
So hang on, you're next. Just one thing. Tabs was technique, attitude, balance, and speed. If you look up Ajax 20 years ago, it was tips, technique, intelligence, physical performance, and speed. Over to you, Stu.
No, thanks, Paul. I think obviously the stats kind of back it up. The distance covered's probably remained the same over a period of time, but the game's getting quicker. So there's more high-speed runs being covered by the players. But I think it's a good point around the technical players. They need to be able to do both, because your out-of-possession strategy needs to complement your in-possession strategy, because you can't maintain a high press for 90 minutes. So if you're kind of keep giving the ball away because you're not technically able to deal with the ball, and you can't maintain the kind of physical output what you want to try and achieve, then you're not going to be very successful. So it's about getting the balance, isn't it? It's about recognizing who you've got at your kind of disposal, and then trying to match up how you're going to defend out of possession, but how you're then going to maximize the contact time you've got with the ball to make sure you've got the technical gifted ones to try and win the game.
Yeah. I think as well, Stuart, it's a really good point about kind of knowing your players and where they're at in relation. So if you're in a league system, like, where are your team at? Are you more likely to spend most games where you're out of possession, so the opposition dominate possession, and you're in the kind of low 40s in terms of percentage of possession? Because if you are, you're going to have to be pressing more often if high press is your defending out of possession strategy. So in that sense, you might then think, well, we're going to press more often, but we're going to press in a way that actually doesn't exert as much energy. So if you go back to them figures that I showed, you might show outside or inside rather than the man-to-man press, because otherwise your players might run out of gas before the end of the game.
Yeah, I suppose when you look at the large picture practice from the designer practice around, really kind of thinking about high press or counter pressing within the opposition third, it's really important around what happens away from the ball. So the back players need to certainly be on the halfway line, if not 10, 15 yards in the opposition's half now, depending on where the position of the ball is. You look at the types of like Van Dijk, he could be 20 yards in the opposition's half, but it's to try and maintain the kind of constant threat on the opposition, because it's very unlikely you'll score off the first phase. It's probably second, third, fourth, and fifth. So how many times can we win the ball back but maintain pressure on the opposition to try and be successful?
Yeah, and that a really important point you brought up there as well is about, because we've talked a lot about the forward players and what, but and maybe throw this back into the lads as well in terms of what are the profile of your defending players, especially your centre backs, for example, to be able to play with a high press. Because obviously, if everyone's pushing up, there's going to be a lot of space in behind, so they're going to need to have good top sprinting speed in case the ball goes over the top. Foz, would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally, Matt. I think one thing I impose on our players is that they defend neutrally when we high press. So a lot of our players are protected with +1 security, and we take that away from them in the development, or I do. I think at international level, they have to learn how to defend 1v1. And if we're going to be really aggressive from the front, then it's a numbers game, and rather than allow them to build through our high press, we go right down on top of teams, which means that we defend neutrally at the back. So our defenders can be split right across the halfway line and have to be aggressive in positions that ordinarily they don't like to be in. We've had to coach a lot of our centre-backs that when the full-back jumps, he comes around and maybe has to mark a widey inside the pitch. He's not particularly used to it and doesn't particularly like it, but it's a challenge and it's a test that he's going to face throughout his career, particularly if he's going to be an England player with the seniors. He's going to have to deal with 1v1 defending. Yeah,
it's a great point, Fozzie, as well, isn't it? And I think Scott Wade came up with a question then about the goalkeeper's role. So if they are being neutral at the back, goalkeeper's role is key.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just on that is the utilisation of coaches. We talked about session design and outcomes, returns, but the actual coaching and the detail of coaching is, we operate on a model whereby if we've got 2 coaches, we'll utilise them because we double the learning. So, for example, what we'll end up with is whilst one coach might be affecting the forward and midfield line and what's going on there, is working then the other coach, the back line, and linking the goalkeeper into it, working on things like line depth, distance, relevance to the ball, pressure on, pressure off, so that we accelerate the learning across the whole team rather than it just be one coach trying to kind of cover everything. So co-coaching is a big thing that we do to try and accelerate and link the learning to, whilst there's a pressing strategy happening in the forwards, we pay attention to that detail. Like you, Foz, we've experienced the same, certainly in my early days of this, where you think you've covered everything in a periodized piece of work, and then all of a sudden you get done with one ball and it ends up as 1-1, or you end up losing the game. So paying attention to the whole linkage of all the principles all the time is really, really important. They're never in isolation.
An interesting question here from Daniel Sutcliffe. He's written here, depending on the age group, maybe rotate positions so they have a chance at a rest. Daniel, you can also look at that. I have a good example of one of the academies I support. I was speaking to a coach about 2.5 months ago, and he said, we had a real breakthrough with a player in a certain age group, top end YDP. We played him in a fullback position, and he was a revelation. He's done really, really well. And I'm thinking, okay, he's 15. The only issue is he's struggling physically, aerobic capacity. Why? Because he doesn't play there very often. So he always plays in the centre of the pitch, often has players round him, doesn't have to use a lot of aerobic capacity to play the game. And I'm thinking, well, why is he not played in those positions before if we're in a developmental programme? Because surely in all four corners, we should be looking to develop all these players or people to be able to get to the next level. And if we haven't done that by 15, then maybe we've missed a trick. So if we come too position specific too early, that affects decision making. It certainly affects physical capacity, whether that's the ability to get up and down the pitch, whether that's the ability as a centre half to turn and defend in a 1v1 situation with a large area. That will also affect the goalkeeper, because someone obviously mentioned the goalkeeper before, on his ability to control the space in front of him and behind the back four. So we have to make sure that we plan for everything. And that only comes by getting more and more experienced in putting over information that will help the players to get better. Okay, we've got now 10 minutes to go. Another question. Right, coaching is great, but if we're at a grassroots club, that might not be an option. So, Stu, I'm going to come to you there on design of session. This is Emma O'Connor. What would be some of the ideas that you would bring out there? Because obviously you do some work with your son's club, and I know he's very young, but he's old enough to play. What would be some ideas there? Just you've got 30 seconds, go.
Yeah, keep it simple. The game's the game, so the kids want to play a game. So if you get the right kind of practice, which is directional, 2 goals, and the kids are kind of looking after themselves, it kind of frees you up as a coach, so you can start getting around the individuals to try and maximise your time. You might consider putting thirds in the pitch and just, the final third where you want them to high press. If they win it back in that one, they get 3 points and score. 2 points in the mid third, and it might be 1 if they get it round your kind of goal. So different simple games like that will allow you to maximise your information to the people who need it.
Delapo, Maxlino, yeah, you're right. If they don't have it, they can't give it. But if you don't try it, you'll never know. So you've got to give them the opportunity to try, because unless we give them the opportunity to try, we actually won't know whether they can succeed. If it's too hard, yes, it will be a problem, and that will affect motivation. But if it's too easy, it will obviously go in the opposite direction.
And Paul, we've got to really be mindful of when they go for the growth spurt as well, haven't we? So they might have it before, then they go through a period of being uncontrolled and not be able to maintain it. So we've got to be really kind of mindful that the kids will go through certain kind of periods within the life where they will be able to do it, then they'll find it really hard. It's how we've got to try and support them for that process. Okay, so linked into that, if you want some more information around that, we've just completed a growth and maturity webinar that's on the YouTube platform. Linked to constraints, that's been mentioned a lot, and area sizes and shape of pitches and timings.
we're recording something on Thursday that will eventually, in about 10 days, that's for our Advanced Youth Award course, but eventually that will be put onto the YouTube platform. So there's a lot of information that you can access from the platform. But, and it is a big but, the key is being able to make that go into practice on the grass with your players. That's the key. How does this information help you to help your players? Because we can watch a million webinars, but the ability to actually put it on into practice, whether that be in the training program, the games program, around the academy, around the camp, that's the key. Okay?
Lee,
Matt,
can I just throw something out there, mate?
Yeah, of course you can, Foz.
Talking about if you don't know, you'll never know, basically. So, you know, my role and John's role in the development age groups is to find out. So in the World Cup in 2017, in the 17 World Cup in India, we played 7 games in 21 days, 30-degree heat, 85% humidity, 4 flights in and around India, which is almost a continent in itself. But we decided to go after teams and see if we could press throughout the tournament. And it turns out that we could. Now, on the back of that tournament was in October. It wasn't at the end of the season. So people will look at that. But when Garrett's selecting these players, and if you can look back and think of the players that were in that front 4, 3 of them are in Garrett's squad already. So he already knows that if he goes to the subcontinent or Qatar in 2022, at the same time of year almost, he's got players within his front 4 that can press regularly throughout the tournament, and that's our job. And looking back at that group, so you talk about player profiles, but players also being able to play in different positions. In the front 4, we had 2 different players play 9. There's only 18 outfield players, by the way. So 2 different players played 9. 3 different players played number 11. 2 played number 7. And 6 different players played in the 10 spot out of the 18. So, yes, we were able to rotate. But the caveat to that is, I think 8 of our players started 6 of the 7 games. So, you know, there's a lot of learning in that. But for me, England teams, based on the work that they do, that you're doing at the academies, can press throughout a tournament if you do it intelligently.
Just to back that up, Foz, we did the same in 2016, similarly when you were in India and Jordan, similar conditions. We didn't play as many games. We played 5. It was about 23 days and similar stuff. You know, we went after teams, you know, even some of the best possession teams in the world like Japan and Brazil. And, you know, similar outcome, you know, 4 of those, that group that went to that tournament are now in Phil's squad. So there is definitely an inherent trend that, you know, if we push work with the players around principles over a period of time, you know, penultimately on a world stage, if that's the way that England wants to play, then, you know, we have to prepare them through the developmental age groups to be able to play that, so that when Phil and Gareth have those players at their disposal later on down the line, they're capable of doing that. And, you know, the word we've used is robust, is that they can do that with sustainability over a period of games.
And just for those coaches, Paul alluded to it earlier, we had a player back in September, and throughout his pathway with the development teams, he's kind of missed camps here and there, and he didn't make the squad that went to the under-17 Euros. He's never had a serious injury, but always injuries that just dipped him out. I don't know whether the kid's robust enough to play 3 games in quick succession, and then maybe 4 games, 5 games, up to 7 games in a tournament. So how do I challenge him? How do I test his robustness? So before the camp in September, we played 3 games in 5 days against Australia, Brazil, and South Korea. And I said to him, look, you're going to play 90 minutes in each game. So he's only got 1 day's rest between the games. So you're going to have to manage yourself. Now, if the kid would have said, look, Fozzie, I can't do it into game 3, we'd have left him out. Of course we would. But my challenge to him was, look, let's see how robust you are. So we did that, and the boy played 3 90 minutes in 5 days. So they go back to the clubs, they get all the data. Next thing, I've got a coach from his club onto me, and I'm getting a wrist slapping for playing him in those 3 games. And yeah, I understand that and I get it. But my challenge to us as coaches is, and Matt will like this, is rather than challenge coach to coach, you need to go back and challenge your sports scientist and say, we need robust players to play in tournament football in the subcontinent in the heat of the summer. How are we going to know if they can do that if we don't challenge them in September, October, November?
Absolutely.
So challenge your sports scientist before you challenge coach your coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd agree with that, Foz. And I think that what you described there about the 17s and their capability of being able to do that, and the challenge then is throughout the professional development phase, have we got the training right so that we're linking in the small-sided stuff, the large-sided stuff, so that we're developing the different muscles and energy systems required to keep progressing that, so that they can keep doing that and do that when it gets to a higher level of a more intense level of football in the senior game. Is the games program right to support that? Is the off-field plan right so that you're actually working on the muscle qualities? Are you working on the speed? But also, are you working together as coach and sports scientists to make sure that those players can keep on building those obvious kind of physical qualities that they've got, the players that have played for you? And can we keep pushing them on in the pro development phase so they can work at higher intensities when, like I say, when the senior game comes around for them?
I'm gonna finish it there because I think that's a great finishing point. First of all, there's been a heck of a lot of information there. So potentially, if you really are that committed to your coaching career, it might be worth at some stage over the next couple of months watching through again at your leisure to take in a lot of that information. Remember, there is a but. It's all about then being able to take that onto the field, into your clubs, into your grassroots clubs, and putting that into practice. A lot of people have asked for more information. The information is YouTube, FA Learning, other sites on Google, but it comes back to you working with your players and knowing your players. I want to thank Matt Portas for his work on the webinar. I want to thank Stuart Delaney. Thanks to John Griffiths, and thanks for Ian Foster, bringing the content to life. The man in the background who's made things work so smoothly, Matt Ramsbottom, another outstanding job. I'll bid you good night and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.